Okay, so why don't we get started here? We got this 9:04. We're going to be clicking 9:05 in 30 seconds or so. So I'll just introduce the chapter here. This is the team chapter for Inland Empire's executive team. We have about a dozen members that range from business coaching to imaging to staffing and consulting, business consulting, payroll, loan services, merchant card, and wealth management, as well as connectivity for your business. So we've been together, we're just counting the years now, some of us 8, 9 years. It's a good group. And so we decided to sponsor a speaker because no one's doing any conferences and seminars, so we're going to do a webinar. And what we're doing is one of our members, John Fairman, happen to know Jerry Rollins. So John, I will give you the honors of introducing Jerry.
Thank you, Adam. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Rollins. Jerry has been a professional athlete, a successful business person, an entrepreneur, and now an author. So I've actually known Jerry for 30 years. Be 30 years probably in September. Jerry has had many accomplishments over the years, including playing hockey at the highest level, building several successful businesses, transforming several businesses into successful companies, and writing a book. But in my opinion, probably his most important accomplishment, next to, of course, being a great husband to his wife, Terry, is being a mentor. Jerry has been a mentor to many people over the years, including myself. And I know that I'm forever grateful for that mentorship. So with that, I will turn it over to Jerry Rollins, author of Enforcer to Entrepreneur.
So thank you, John. Thanks for the nice introduction. So for all of you, I'll just tell you, John is a very special person in my life. And there's probably only a half dozen people that fit in that category. And we met in 1991, I believe, and he's shared in my journey ever since. So I'll tell you a John Fairman story very quickly. So first time I met him, he was sitting across the desk from me. And I joined a company in my first equity position as VP of sales. It was a family business located in Victorville with an office down in Rancho Cucamonga or Ontario. I can't remember which. Ontario. And this guy, we're doing the opening interview and he sits across the desk from me and he crosses his legs. And I knew he was going to be a successful salesperson because he had holes in his shoes, in the bottom of his shoes, because his feet were up like this. And I saw that there were holes. And so I knew this guy actually knows how to go out and cold call. So that was one of our first meetings. So John, thanks for having me here today. And so what I'd like to do, and any of you, if you want to put up a hand or chat or anything, I mean for this to be interactive versus a conversation as compared to, dictatorial. So anyone can interrupt anytime they want and just poke a question at me. But I'm going to share a bit with you today about leadership, and I'm going to keep it. I tried to do lists for everything. I'm a list guy. So I'm going to talk to you about 7 things I learned about leadership through the years as a student of leadership, and share them with you. So I'm going to keep them real simple, and I'll share my notes after. So first, I'm going to start with my journey in business. So, growing up in Canada, Western Canada, my father, which I just thought was normal, played in the NHL. So I was a hockey brat. It's kind of like being an Air Force brat, because you live in one city in the winter, and then back in those days, in the 50s and 60s, they actually had to have jobs in the summer to pay because they only played 6 months a year. So I grew up with a dad in the NHL. Long story short, I was a pretty good athlete, good student, probably destined to go the college route in sports, But a divorce in my mom and dad's life changed my direction, and I became a juvenile delinquent at 13, 14. And long story short, my parents ended up getting remarried 25 years later, which is kind of a happy ending. But I went down a bad path, started skipping school, and ended up getting, I got 3 options at age 17. Is you can join the Army in Canada, which is like 2 pop guns and bows and arrows. You can go get a job in the lumber mill, or you can go away and play hockey. And so I took option C and went away and played hockey. And so I wasn't a person who was destined to play professionally. I just did it because it was the easiest route for me. Played professionally for a couple of years, then went into business. And when you're an enforcer in hockey, which, you know, at one point in time, I was the most penalized player in hockey. I know, as handsome as I am, you probably don't believe that, but I was a fighter, earned a living doing that. And so what does an enforcer do that's also a high school dropout in your second career is you, of course, go into sales, because you go beat people up and do it for a living. So I went into sales, the great thing about my first job is there were great mentors at my first company. I selected a good company. And so I learned my craft there. They trained the heck out of me. My one boss was from IBM. My other boss was from Dow Chemical. So I got very well trained in my first company. But I also learned about equity. Is I didn't have any equity, and I helped build a company, took it from 3 to 24 million, sold it to a company which later became Alco Standard, which morphed into Icon Office Solutions, and then Rico Corporation, I think. And learned my craft, left that company because I didn't want to be a number in a giant corporation, and took my first equity position, which is where I met John. Joined a small family business, and long story short, had 3 exits from family businesses and private companies where I would join them when they're in the 1 to 5 million range, grow them to 10 to 100 million, and then sell them. Did that until I was in my mid 40s and didn't want to have employees anymore. So hung my shingle as a business advisor coach, because I joined peer groups like you all are in my early 30s, and John saw me go through that. I learned more from people in different businesses than I ever could have in a class. And I'm a constant learner and a constant writer. So everything I learn every day, I actually journal. I do it electronically now. I used to do it in books like this, which I still do this personally, the 5-minute journal every day. But I started doing this in my 20s and journaling everything. But now I do it electronically so I can search it. So I'm a constant note taker, as John will remember. And so I started documenting things I learned through the years. Fast forward, told people I was going to do this coaching thing in my peer groups, and overnight I had 20 clients in 45 days. So my wife suggested I divide them into business forums. So I divided those 20 into 2 10-person business forums. And to this day, that's what I do. I have about 130 CEOs and 6 coaches I work with, most in Southern California, Orange County. But what COVID has done is I now have people joining from different cities, states, and even countries now who are joining our groups and coming in virtually. So I'm going to start it up in Tennessee now that I've moved here. So that's what I do to this day. And we meet monthly and talk about things. So I want to start with the first lesson I learned in leadership. And again, by the way, anybody wants to interrupt, please let me know. So I'm a constant reader. John Maxwell says, an effective leader knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. And what that message meant to me when I read it years ago is you have to embody everything you tell people and what you have written on the wall in your business. Because so often people have vision and value statements written down, and then you meet the people and you go, you know, this is a bunch of baloney. these leaders don't embody these values, or they don't live this kind of a life, they're not good examples of, you know, I hate to espouse it, but I think you need to be a good example about how to lead your life, not just within the business, but outside your business. So one of the best lessons I learned from when I joined my first peer group is two 50-year-olds said their greatest their greatest regrets in life, they ran giant multinational firms. Greatest regret is their divorce and how they had failed in their personal life in the first part of their life, and how they had done a lot to change that in the second half of their life. So in their first 30, 40 years, they went through wives and children, and then they fixed that and actually became friends with their former wives and children because they recognized that they built great careers but didn't have great personal lives. So that was my first learning. John will remember this, but one of our first leaders of a company that I joined, he used to say all the time, he said, say what you're going to do and do what you're going to say. So when you tell people you're going to do something, make sure you actually do it and become a reliable person in all aspects of life. And I guess the final on this number one of, you know, being an effective leader is you cast a shadow as a leader or as a parent or in your community. So the shadow you cast is long, and you need to be aware of the effect of that shadow, both on your community, your employees in the community, your children, because raising good children is a big responsibility also. Although I raised perfect children, and John knows why, because I didn't have any. Because my mother said early after I got married, she said, you know, as bad a kid as you were, your sister and brother were perfect and you were the bad seed. So I suggest you not have children. And my wife and I paid attention to that advice and didn't have kids. The second thing I learned, and you know, you guys are good examples of this, is leaders make lousy spectators. So I don't know about you all, but I don't like watching. I have a problem going and watching games or sports because I'm not a spectator. So what it means to me in business is if you have employees, I'll again speak to guys like John and people that work for me. Before John became a manager, whenever there was an opportunity for him to do something as a volunteer, he always had his hand up to help people out, to teach, to, you know, to help, to coach. When we had new employees, he wanted to mentor them before we paid him to do that. And so people set examples all the time of being these mentors, coaches, even when they're new employees. And I'm sure you all see that in your employee base and even within your family. So my joke about that is I believe there's three types of people in life. And there are people who make things happen, and I call them leaders. There are people who watch what happens, and I call them followers, which it's good to have followers. Everybody can't be a leader. And then there are people who wonder what happened, and I call them victims. So leaders, followers, and victims. And I'm sure you've all seen victims in your life who always have a reason for bad things happening to them. I'm not saying that bad things don't happen to good people, because bad things do happen to good people. But sometimes bad things are always happening to people and they're wondering why. So that's lesson number 2. I want you all to think for a second, and is there a chat room here, John? Is there a way to chat? So I'm going to ask you all if you have a keyboard to write something down and send it in chat about what you think the best attribute of a great leader is. Maybe think of the best leader you ever worked with, worked for, observed, have seen, and just write down one word or 2 words that describe that leader. And I'm going to look here and I'm going to say, I assume, Craig, you mean having a great attitude, right? Somebody who's positive and upbeat. Integrity, walks the talk. What a great example. Clear vision, energy and honesty, servant leader, supportive, motivating. So I'm going to share with you just one thing about motivation, and this is in my book. So, and John's heard me say this many times. I feel that leaders, I don't think you can motivate people. I think you can, as a leader, demotivate people. I think as a leader, you hire motivated people, and by hiring motivated people, you don't have to motivate them. All you got to do is get yourself up every day and then hang out with great people. And I call it the eagle or turkey complex. Eagles are these high-flying animals that soar over everybody. And then there's turkeys that waddle around. As a matter of fact, they make a little migration through my yard every day at about 3 o'clock. They come from the field behind our house and waddle up the yard. Sometimes they get up in the first branch of a tree, but they're easy targets for the hunters around here, unfortunately. So eagles and turkeys, I prefer to hang out with eagles. So I'm just going to talk to you about, I think leaders are inspiring. I think leaders, especially in these times, you all need to be innovative. In these days, I think there's going to be more change in the last calendar year and the year going forward than there's been in the last 20 years. I think there's going to be migrations. I think there's going to be innovation. I think people are going to be, they estimate that 50% of people from last year through 2 years from now will change careers, which has never happened before. So people are finding out they can work anywhere, they can be anywhere, they can do many things. I think there's going to be a big migration. Empathetic. Now, what does empathy mean to me as a leader? I think being an empathetic leader does not mean being a wussy. And I was going to use another word, but it's not appropriate. But wussies are not good leaders. Empathetic leaders are, it's an important attribute. You have to care about people to be a great leader. You got to take risks. My wife and I were speaking about it the other day. The biggest risk I ever took was joining the company that John worked at. It was undercapitalized. It was small. It was a family business. When I joined the company, I had 5 business partners at the company in a family, which is a recipe for disaster. But I took a big risk, and it ended up, I left a Fortune 500 company to take that risk. So sometimes no risk, no reward. Principled, one of you said principles are important. I want to speak to a couple athletes to talk to you about this. So although, you know, John won every sales award he could ever win and every manager's award, but John was always humble. And, you know, it's interesting, great athletes and people don't have to tell people how great they are. So 2 of the greatest athletes I ever personally played with or against, one had a name by the name of Wayne Gretzky, who you may have heard of him. And I played with him when he was a rookie and then met him years later when he was very accomplished. And the guy at 17 was humble, although he was the best player in the world even at 17. And years later at 40, he was still humble. Another gentleman by the name of Drew Brees, who was one of my neighbors, again, humble man, very accomplished, devout Christian, very principled, great leader, but humble, even though he won everything in the world, has made hundreds of millions of dollars, still humble. Tenacious. I want to talk about tenacity as a leader. You know, this last year has been an example of the shit hitting the fan, excuse my French. But the you-know-what hit the fan, and being a tenacious leader has never been more important during these challenging times. Being trustworthy, I think if you lose trust, you know, you can work years to gain trust, and you can lose it in a minute by doing something bad. And as a leader, we have to be conscious of that. And then two things that I fail at, that I have to work at all the time, is self-control. So you can probably imagine, since I had 110 fights by the time I was 25, I had some control issues. And I'm a pretty fiery guy. I still am to this day. And so John will tell you that there were times that John had to walk me back off the cliff when I wanted to do things. And he was kind of, you know, the voice of reason, since he was so calm. So self-control. I've been guilty of not behaving correctly early in my career, and I learned my lessons. So I haven't had an outbreak in many years. So that's lesson number 3. Lesson number 4 is leaders do time. I think a challenge I was posed the other day is, it said, you know, hey, we've got a lot of young people in our company, and they seem to want instant gratification and success. And it's interesting that that has occurred in business, and that people seem to want that instant gratification. And so I think what I learned is, my first years in business, I had great leaders. I learned a lot from them. I paid my price to get where I was going. 3 of the best coaches I ever knew in sports, John Wooden was one of them. John taught high school and coached for a decade before he ever went into college. One of the winningest coaches ever. Bear Bryant, a good Southern boy, coached high school again for a decade before he ever coached in college. Scotty Bowman in the hockey world coached junior hockey, and then became the winningest coach ever in professional hockey, along with winning more Stanley Cups than anyone ever had. But they paid their price at a level. And the lesson in business is, when you have people that come to you after 2 years through the instant gratification system and say, hey, I've been here 2 years, I think I deserve to be president of the company now. I think that's where coaching and mentoring is a good thing to do with these young folks, and talk to them about career path, talk to them about what they need to learn, interview them when there is an opening in your company, and talk about how they're going to get to the next level in the company. I think it's very important. Lesson 5, being a constant learner and being coachable. I think some of you, from what I heard, are business coaches, from what I understood. And the first thing I learned, so I hung my shingle and said, hey, I'm going to be a business coach, you know, a decade ago. And what I learned is, my first 2 clients were free clients. And I learned the lesson of free is, a year later, I had to fire them both. And I had to fire them both because they weren't coachable. They said they were. I'll give you an example of one. Would show up late for every meeting, had not done the homework that I'd assigned them at the last meeting. And any advice I gave them, although I gave little advice, I did give advice, they totally ignored. So the one guy, the guy who showed up late, never did his homework, we could have sold his company when he was 28 years old for $62 million. And he said, my company's worth $1 billion. That's baloney. 2 months later, I fired him. And 4 months after that, he was bankrupt. He's an example in my book, remains a good friend today. And he had success after that because he actually started listening, because he went through a crisis. The second guy, again, similar story. He did his homework, but wasn't coachable, didn't listen, had all of the answers, and we fired him. So that's when I started charging people for my coaching, because I went, you know, if they have to write a check every month and it's a substantial amount of money, I'll find out if they're really interested. The only people I coach for free are nonprofit organizations, because they can't afford to pay. And I work with 14 nonprofit CEOs to this day that we coach at Sage. So being a constant learner, I will tell you this, although I'm a high school dropout, I started reading at age 4. Thank God my mom taught me. I still to this day read 3 to 4 books a week, and I'm a constant reader. I think reading and listening to podcasts and listening to, you can do it while you're walking, you can do anytime now with Audible, which is a really great thing. Being a constant learner keeps you, because I'm an old guy, later this month, I'll be 66. 2 things I don't want to be is I don't want to be a burden on society, and I don't want to be a dinosaur. So a dinosaur to me, I have a dear friend who's my age who thinks computers are stupid and refuses to use Zoom. So he's kind of put a label on himself now, and unless he can meet live, he won't do a business meeting, because that's a silly way to do things. So sometimes you can label yourself because of personal biases that take you out of the game. And so I think that's what I refer to when being a constant learner and not becoming a dinosaur. Because at some point in time, you have no value if you're not a constant learner. So number 6, I think the most important critical change in my business career, in my late 20s, I was a hard charging sales leader. I was number 1 almost every year as a leader in a company, but I didn't recognize obstacles. When obstacles or people got in my way, I ran them over. And so there was a lot of bodies around me and a huge wake. And so I went through a self-assessment process, which I think changed my life. Call it Myers-Briggs, call it DISC. Have any of you, those of you that are on screen, have any of you gone through that? Any of you gone through, or through chat that have been through it? If you have not been through it, you can go online. I can share tools, or you can go to my website and you can click on the free links and go do self-assessments. Do it and become aware of yourself. So I didn't know how challenging I was to deal with. People liked me, but they were afraid of me. And so I needed to change that, and that changed my trajectory in life and in business. And so I do those personal discovery exercises every year to this date, and I love doing them because you do change over time. So if you did it when you were 30 and you did it when you were 40, you're a different person when you're 50. So do and find out who you are. So I call it self-actualization. And without mentioning names, John and I worked with some amazing leaders in business. These guys were super talented, super intelligent, extremely competent, but they didn't know who they were. And unfortunately, I tried to fix those people, and John will know who they are, but I was not able to. So at one point, I had to terminate both those people. And they were top performers. They were A+ players, but they were onboard terrorists, if you know what that means. And so they didn't know who they were. I'll never forget, I spent tens of thousands of dollars trying to get this one person to be aware of who they were. And they came back from one of those assessments and said, you know what? Although everybody thinks I'm that, they don't know. I'm going to prove to you that they're all wrong and I'm right. A month later, I had to terminate that person, unfortunately. And they never changed throughout their whole life, unfortunately, never changed their behavior. And we're still onboard terrorists to this day. So unfortunately, that happened. And then the final lesson I have for you guys is learning to lead. So how do you learn to lead? First of all, hang out with other great leaders. So that's one thing I learned is early in my career, I went, you know what? I'm going to start hanging out with really good people who are smarter than me and better than me. And maybe by vacuum effect, they'll drag me up to their level. And it happened. So I was the dumbest person in every room that I was in. And I had the least amount of money and the least amount of experience, but by hanging around amazing people, I became better at what I did. And it kind of elevated my behavior and my performance. I don't believe leaders are born. I think you have some DNA that you get from your parents, but I think you can learn to be a leader, like everything else, through hard work, by going to class. And so I'll end this with John's hero, Vince Lombardi, once said that leaders are not born, they're made like anything else through hard work. So now I'm going to open it up to questions, chat, whatever we wish to do. So we can go live,
right.
Mike, if you want.
Yep. So I can ask that everybody unmute, or unmute if you're going to ask a question.
Sure. And I like chaos, so feel free to shoot anything you want. You can ask any question at all, and this is being recorded, and I'll answer you honestly.
Well, my smart aleck question is always, do you have the winning lottery numbers? Because, you know, that's the fastest way to success, right?
You know, my wife, as my wife says, we're the poorest people in every neighborhood we live in. So every time we go out to buy groceries, she buys $10 of each of those tickets, hoping we can move out of the ghetto. So we're still hoping for that big $1 billion payday, but I'm sure we'd gamble it away or do something stupid with it.
I think you got to work pretty hard to get rid of $1 billion. Although your example of your 28-year-old that could have sold for, what did you say, 62 million and
62 million, and he went bankrupt and lost it all. Yep. I've seen examples, you know, and I think, unfortunately, I've learned more in my life from people that I didn't want to emulate, that were bad examples. I've learned as much or more from them, because I guess it's just happenstance that there's a lot of bad leaders out there. Luckily, I worked for some great ones in my career, but I also worked for some horrible ones that I learned, or not great ones that I learned some valuable lessons from. But one of the lessons I also learned that I was just lecturing on yesterday is, if you find that it's hard in your business, that you don't have a lot of A players in your business, you know, use ABC players as an example, or 1, 2, 3, however you evaluate them, or you think, the best example I ever had is I had a leader sit in a meeting, and I'll call him a leader. I was substitute coach in a meeting, and this gentleman sat in a room of 12 CEOs and said, you know, I've hired, this ABC thing's a bunch of malarkey. I'm an A player, but every time I go out and recruit and hire an A player, I get them on board in 45 days, they're gone. They suck. So I remember at the time writing down my notes in my little computer, and I can remember the guy's name, his face. The whole room was thinking this. We didn't say, you know, if you go out and hire A players and they leave, it's because you're a C who thinks he's an A. And so one of the best messages I ever learned in leadership is A's don't work for C's. And so the 2 times I took jobs in companies that I was working for C's, I didn't stay long in those jobs. As a matter of fact, I've had 3 long-term jobs in my career and 2 short-term. One lasted 18 months and one lasted 12 months. And it was because the leadership sucked in those companies, and I couldn't work in that culture environment.
So Jerry, that's
yes, sir.
That's a great point, because I've had, whenever I leave a company, it's because a new manager comes in and it's just a cluster at that point.
Yep.
And they do something, there's just not a leader. But I've had guys that manage, a friend of mine, his superpower is just putting the blinders on.
Yep.
And saying, you know what, this guy will be gone, there'll be a new manager here in 2 to 3 years, it'll be fine. And I just did my biggest issue is how do you keep those blinders on? Because I just have a difficult time with that. And I go, you know what, I'm done. And I leave.
You know, and I'll give you the example of my first real job. So my first sales manager was a superstar. And 14 months into his leadership, he died of a heart attack. Unfortunately, he didn't take care of himself physically. And you're going to laugh when I tell you this. It was a great company and a good culture, not a great culture, but a good company. And we had a really good group of people working there. And I'll tell you that I had 6 sales managers in the following 3 years, because unfortunately, the president of that company was not a great guy. He was not a good leader. The vice presidents were all superstars, but this guy was not a great guy. So I had 6 sales managers. So how did I put on the blinders? I was the top sales person in the company out of 30, 40 salespeople every year for those 3 years. I was number 1 34 of 36 months, and I was number 2 twice. So how did I put the blinders on? I was making so much money, and I had an independent producing culture, so I didn't care. So guess what happened in the 36th month after 6 managers had gone through the door?
You became
What do
the
you think
manager.
happened?
You became
Huh?
the manager.
Unfortunately, guess how I got promoted? The president of the company, who I didn't like or respect, came to me and said, "You're the new sales manager." And it was about a 50% cut in pay. I was going to have to go from working 8 hours a day to 12 hours a day. And oh, by the way, he demanded that all of his managers come in every Saturday and hang around for 4 hours. That was a requirement of the job. And he told me, "You've got the job." And I said, "I respectfully decline the position." And guess what I was told?
You're fired.
If you decline the position, you're terminated. So between 5 o'clock that night or 6 o'clock that night at a promotion dinner and 8 o'clock that next morning, I had to make a decision to take the position. Fortunately, I took the position and I figured out how to make it work, and was in that job for 7 years and promoted through the company. And I figured out a way to work with that guy and to deflect his stupidity, and created a good culture underneath me. And so we as VPs in the company created a great culture, and we deflected all the challenges from above. So the good news is I was able to rise up, overcome it, and do it. But that same thing happened to me years later. After a year in a huge multinational firm, I was promoted to vice president, and I got the same promotion. I was the second top salesperson in the country. I was promoted again. The president of the company announced it to the board and the whole company that I was promoted. He just forgot to tell me. And so at my promotion dinner, I was told, "You're promoted to national sales manager." And I went, "How much authority do I have in this position?" He said, "None. You can't make a decision. You can't utilize capital. You can motivate and get sales, but you're not allowed to hire, fire, promote, budget, do any of that. You're the vice president, VP of sales." And so I declined the position. And that's why I ended up working with John, is because I declined the position and he told me, "I've announced this, you can't decline it. So if you decline it, you have to leave the company." And so that's why I left my big company job, because I was promoted again into a position with no authority and all of the responsibility, which I couldn't do. So I hope I answered your question in a long roundabout way. Is if you can change the culture, take a leadership role, if you can stay insulated, stay with the company, if it's a good company. But I don't suffer knuckleheads well. So after the first 10 years of my career, I just couldn't work for idiots anymore.
Interesting.
Any other questions, thoughts?
Well, I work with multiple companies, as people in our group know. But I think I have two, I don't know if they're questions or comments. There's been multiple times I've been asked to, and I work more on the finance side, but I've been asked to come into companies, and you'll get an owner of a company that says, "I know everything about this business. I've been in this for 30 years, and my father was in this business." And I always want to say, well, if you know everything, why did you call me And the other thing is, how often do you run into, I feel like a lot of small business owners, they want to work for themselves. And the reason, either this becomes a primary reason that they go into business for themselves, or it's because they don't want to, they say they don't want to work for anybody, but what they really don't want to do is they don't want to listen to anybody. And so it becomes almost an ego thing where I can do whatever I want. And you go in and say, well, you can, to a certain extent, you can do whatever you want. But there are things you have to comply with, whether it's IRS rules, whether it's state tax rules, and there becomes, again, this almost arrogance where it's my company, I do whatever I want. And I've talked about this. Adam's primarily a banker, usually. And we've talked about this before, where they, there's this courting period where you try to find a banker, and okay, now I've got the banker I want. And then almost immediately the banker does what you ask, loan you some money or something. And now we become adversaries, because the bank loans you money and they want, whether it's compliance documents or that you're using the money the way that you said you're going to use the money. But in reality, they think it's their money now. And you try to tell them it's not your money. If I were to loan you $5 million, you better be sure. I want to know I'm going to get it back, and I want to know how you're using it.
Yep. So you've said two key things is the best, when we're young in business, we take on the wrong type of clients. The best customers you ever get are the ones you turn down. So I would tell you that selling, and John has seen me sell through the years, and we sold together, the best clients you ever get are some that you turn down. So I think any selling situation is a two-part opportunity. It's a chance for them to sell you and you to sell them. And in you selling them, you have to let them know, in gaining clients, if you're not coachable or if you can't listen and it's not a true partnership, it's best that we not start this relationship and have a bad parting. So I think every selling situation, you have the opportunity, I call it the takeaway close. And as soon as you tell an egomaniac that they can't do business with you, they want to do business with you, but it's on your terms and your conditions. So telling the truth in selling and doing a takeaway close of, I want to work with clients, but I want to work with clients that actually, where we have a true partnership and a true relationship. And I tell people that run $100 million companies, when they call me to work with them, that we have to have the brutally honest conversation up front, because I don't want a short-term relationship. I want long-term relationships that's mutually beneficial. And if you're not willing to enter into one of those, I can refer you elsewhere. And you can have somebody come in and tell you whatever you want to hear, and then you can fire them in a year and go on to the next. So did I add some clarity or thought to your position there?
Yeah, well, what I've also found is, I've worked with some of these companies, and then usually after a period of time, in most cases, then all of a sudden they don't know everything. And they start, I guess it's a trust factor in some cases. Yep. that yeah, maybe I don't know everything about this, or maybe this is something that somebody else should be handling that I can let go of.
Yeah, and I think there's some, you'll see in my, on my website, which I'll share with you, I have interview questions under there. Now, it might not seem relevant to selling a new client, but those interview questions are the same things I ask when I'm pursuing a new client. And it might sound funny, but I believe they're the same things you want to know in a client as you would in an employee, because you're still selling yourself and they're selling themselves. So It's a free download. You don't have to buy anything. You can go in and download those interview questions anytime, and they work in selling.
Okay.
So there's free junk there. Other questions?
Jerry, anybody have any questions? Because I think we should start to wrap this up.
Yes, sir.
Real quick. One question I have is that one of the challenges we have is, you bring on, we brought on a lot of younger talent, which I think is awesome. And they definitely energize me. But, sometimes it's how do you encourage them? Look, I can't be the guy with all the ideas, right? I've been doing this a really long time, and unlike some of Rick's clients, I don't believe I know it all, particularly in today's environment, which is changing so fast, right? It's everything. I'm in the logistics industry, and it changes by the day. So, how do you encourage those younger people to look? You need to bring your ideas up. I need you to be, bringing ideas to the table. You can't be waiting for me to solve all the problems. I need you to get engaged.
So I'll teach you the John Fairman rule. Because although John is brilliant, John was a project of training. John is super smart. John used to come in my office 5 times a day because we worked very closely together. And years later, it would be 5 phone calls. No, it would be 1 every morning, 7 o'clock. So when John used to come in my office, after he came in the first 1,000 times, I said, John, when you come into my office with a question, you have to come in with a solution in each pocket of your pants.
Yeah.
So you have to bring 2 solutions, and I'm going to do one of 2 things. I'm going to say, boy, great idea. Which one do you think is the best? Good, go with A. Or, you know what? B sounds fabulous. Let's tweak it a bit and run with it. So when you bring a problem in my office, when a CEO calls me, here's the first thing I ask him is, okay, what are your 2 solutions that before you called me, you've already come up with? Because I don't want to reinvent the world or be redundant.
Yeah.
And then I say, great, super idea. Yeah, I'd go with 1 because in my experience, it says that's the best resolution. So, but then it goes back to another issue. You can't motivate people and you can't make chicken salad. This is one of, I'm going to be crass. You cannot make chicken salad out of chicken shit.
Right.
That's my first coach told me. And so what it means is if you hire the wrong people, you're not going to get great results. So go to the interview section and the selection part of my free website, and you can see how to hire great people. Okay?
All right.
Because they're not going to bring great ideas if they don't have any. And then if you answer the questions all the time, they're never going to come up with a solution.
I agree.
Okay, Jerry, do you want to share your website?
It's jerryrollins.com, and there's all kinds of free articles there, free downloads. I believe in giving people something and expecting nothing in return. And if you do that, it'll be returned 100-fold. So you got to give back.
All right.
So jerryrollins.com, download anything you want. It's free.
Awesome.
Other than the book, you have to pay for that.
And the book you can find on Amazon, I would assume, right?
Yep, it's on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Just type in my name, Jerry Rollins, and it's available in any format. So digital, audiobook, paper, hardback, you can do it there.
Awesome.